All right. Good to see you all. We are going to dive right back in. I hope after last week's tutorials, things were starting to click a little bit, but it is dense. I fully understand. This is a lot to take in, and it's only going to get denser. But let's just see what happens and take it away. So I have a new project that I'm going to share with you that you'll be able to follow along if you want. Follow along with if you want. You can see it over here. Um, in this one, I made a new level, just an initial map. I might be adding stuff to it later, so it might look different than just this initial thing looks like. But what we have here is our directional light, our floor, and something new called a skeletal mesh actor. It says SKM mannequin, and you can see it right here. And this is our first avatar, which is kind of the namesake of this class, obviously, why we're looking into all of this. And what I want to break down is in this video in particular is where did this avatar come from? Where can we make avatars? What files are associated with the avatar, and how do we organize them, and what can we expect from them? And also, how do we make this avatar move a little bit, just to start thinking ahead? So I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to minimize this. Some of these files are already here, but I want to show you how I'd bring them in. I might fast forward a little bit rather than you watching me move all these things. And what I want to do is introduce you to not even a software, it's a cloud software called Mixamo. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It's very prevalent in a lot of a lot of work that people do in Unity and Unreal. And what Mixamo is it's a Adobe product. I don't even know if a product is the right word. It's like always on the verge of disappearing. It's been around for like 7 years, and it hasn't changed. Thank goodness. But I don't know what the future holds for it. But it's great for an introduction to what's known as a skeletal mesh. And what a skeletal mesh is, you remember the presentation I gave you. I'm going to go back to Unreal for a second, actually. In that presentation I gave you in class, I broke down the different file types. When I bring a cube out here, this is what's known as a static mesh. A static mesh is just a 3D object that doesn't really have any behaviors in terms of moving, kinetic chains, animations. There's exceptions to the rule, but a static mesh is kind of what you see is what you get. What we're working with avatars is skeletal meshes, and that implies that there's a skeleton inside of it. So this Mixamo website, I'll talk about how we get there and what all that in just a second, but just to disable this viewpoint of this character I have right here, you can see that it's actually laid out like a skeleton, and these are the different bones we have as part of the skeletal mesh. So that's the biggest difference is within a skeletal mesh there's a rig or a skeleton which is comprised of bones, and each of those bones has a point in space, a 3D point, or like a location, a rotation, and technically a scale. Okay, so that's what we're working with. Backing up a little bit, if you want to find out more about it, just go over that presentation I give. Mixamo is free. All you need is Adobe account, and that does not mean you need a paid Adobe account. You can just use your NYU one. You can make a new one. You don't have to pay anything. You just have to log in with an Adobe account. And just mixamo.com. I'm going to skip that process because it's fairly easy to get up and going on your own. And I get two things here. I get characters and animations. Characters is a little self-explanatory. There's different characters you can choose. I went with this one called Mannequin, which is frighteningly realistic, I guess. Let's go with a different one just because I don't want to have my files kind of overlap with each other. I don't want to end up in a conflict. So let's find something kind of generic. Leonard, sure. I'm not going to use Leonard too much going further. Leonard's in what's known as a classic kind of T-pose configuration. This is very common for motion capture, for calibration. It's also kind of a common pose while people are designing characters because everything's exposed. It's an industry standard. That's great. And there's some options for the T-pose. We don't need to adjust those. And I'm just going to go ahead and download this. And FBX is the file type we want to work with. These other things we really don't have to worry about. I frankly don't even know what without skin means. If you want to explore that, you can. And we'll give it a second to download here. I like to download stuff when I'm working on a project. If I actually go back to my Unreal Engine folder archive, or like project settings, you can see here we have our content folder. This is where I have my Unreal project saved. I usually just create a folder called media for any media that's associated with this project, and I save it in there. Also, I like to use a naming convention that's common in Unreal, where you put the file type as kind of an all caps thing before it. So I'm going to put skm Leonard, and that stands for skeletal mesh. So when I import it into Unreal, it'll automatically name those files for me in a way I can understand. You can see I've already done the same with the mannequin. Again, we'll have those files and we'll work from there, but I'm just doing this as an example. An FBX file is, it has skeleton rigs, it has animations, it has materials, it has textures, as I kind of covered in class. An OBJ only has a 3D mesh, and maybe, I don't think it has anything but a 3D mesh. It's a static mesh. An OBJ cannot be a skeletal mesh to my knowledge, so you have to use FBX files. So I'll say save. And that's great. We're gonna import this in Unreal Engine in a second, but I also want to give it some animations. And animations is kind of a terminology that's different than what we think of as 2D animation or 3D animation, like a experimental animation. What animations mean in this kind of video game engine space is kind of recorded motion capture. It doesn't have to be literally recorded off of a body. It could be handmade kind of motion. But an animation is a file applied to a skeleton rig, which allows for the playback of some motion, so to speak. So let's click here. And you can see I have a couple of options. It shows a different mesh or model than the one we currently have. That's all right. As long as the same skeleton with the same bones and the same names apply, and there's minimal kind of difference in scaling, I think any animation should translate to another one. Once the naming is off, it won't be compatible. But in this case, everything we download from Mixamo has the same bones, the same names, so we're good to go. So if I click on this animation capoeira, you can see that it applies to the mesh. I think my head's blocking this right now, but down at the bottom here is kind of a frame-by-frame playback. So if you want to think of animation almost as like a video file for motion, that's kind of a good way to think about it. Again, if I turn off the mesh, we can see that the skeleton is moving. That would be true regardless of the mesh I choose here. And then some other things, this isn't common in all tools, but you can adjust some of the settings for the animation file before you download it. So let me, I just want to look at some of these. One thing to keep in mind, I already downloaded a idle, a walking, a running, and some character crying and character applauding kind of things that we're going to build with in a future tutorial. I just want to pay attention to, if I grabbed run for this character, which here's a fast run, notice in this that it's running from a place to a place. We want to toggle anything that we're working with for this instance in place. So now the animation is happening, but the character's not moving relative to the actual space that he's moving in. And that's because we're going to use this kind of we're going to move a capsule that holds our character later on. And while that capsule's moving, it's going to play an animation that's in sync with the capsule movement. So we just want to make sure that everything downloaded is in place. You can always come back and re-download it. I'm sure some of you will forget that step, and then you'll see what happens when you get it kind of wrong. In fact, maybe I guess I could actually download this as an example. No, anyway, it's all right. I think you get the sense of it. Let's just get something, a taunt. Sure, I'll download that. It's in place and stuff. I'll say download. Now here's the funny thing. This animation file is not going to be any different than our FBX file with the character. You know, it's the import settings to let us select certain parts of it. But for my sake, just to keep things kind of organized, I'm going to give a_taunt, and that's going to remind me that I downloaded this with the intention of it being an animation file. It still has the mesh, it still has the skeleton rig, it has the materials in all of these files, but I can disable that when I'm importing the file to say just import the animation portion of this file in order not to have multiple copies of things. So that's great. You know, like I said, download as many animations as you want to play with. I would aim for kind of a basic standing, walking, run cycle kind of things, and then maybe choose a few other fun ones like more emotions or kind of dances if you want to bring that in. But that's as much as I'm going to do with Mixamo today. And then I'm going to open back up my Unreal folder. I've already started to organize my folders a little bit. Let's go ahead and delete this guy, or person I should say, I don't know. I had a character folder and a maps folder. Under my character folder I have mannequin. I'm going to make a new one just for Leonard. And I'm going to go back to my media folder. And make sure that you all can see this. So I have my skeletal mesh Leonard. For Unreal, the best way to import files, unless you're working with a more specific kind of specific software library, you could do file import. I find that doesn't work that well. I don't know why, but I like to just grab the file and drag it until you can see that plus icon and let go. And this is where we start to look at some important things. And I'm just going to I'm going to try and reduce the complexity of this. When we're importing an FBX, it's going to give us lots of options. We don't need to touch most of those options. The initial one, if you're downloading a new character, that first one you did called SKM, I do want to tell it that it's a skeletal mesh, and I do want to tell it to import a mesh. We're telling it, like, I want all the information, I want all of it. I don't need the animation, don't import that, because I'm just trying to set the baseline of the character I'm downloading. And later on we'll target certain skeletons, but by saying import mesh and skeletal mesh, we're saying create a skeleton specific to this mesh. Everything else is a bit superfluous. There are times that you would not want it to import a material or the texture. That's not one of those times. And it doesn't matter if you say import all or import. If you drag multiple FBX files, you can say import all to have the same settings. So I'll just say import. It might take a little bit of time depending on some stuff. Probably right about now. And you might get some messages like this. Let's see. It looks like there's a texture name that was the same as another character I already did. I usually get this no smoothing group, but nothing that's an error, just giving me a heads up. I don't have to worry about it too much. And look at all this stuff that it downloaded or imported when I imported the character. Just to get ahead of some of this stuff, everything red, it's actually color coded, and I apologize if my head's blocking some of this. These red ones are textures, that's just two-dimensional images that are wrapped around a 3D model. The green ones are the materials, and the materials are basically like applying a texture to a model and also giving it information of how light should interact with it, like if it's glossy, if it's metallic, if it's matte or rough. I'm going to go ahead and just I'm going to make a folder and call it materials. Get those out of the way. And the rest of what you get is a skeletal mesh, a physics asset, and a skeleton. That's great. I'm not going to look at those quite yet because I actually want to look at it with the mannequin because that's what we're going to use moving forward. Just know that I'm showing you the kind of import and download process. So I'll go back to my media folder, and if you remember, I also downloaded that animation taunt file. Now for any animations we have associated with our character, I'm going to download, I'm going to drag it out here, and I get the same import thing. Except this time, actually, I mean, nothing's much different except it shows me a skeleton. What I want this time is I want to download this file as an animation, and I want to apply it to an existing skeletal mesh I already have. I don't want to re-download the skeletal mesh and all that stuff. So I'm going to unselect skeletal mesh. Actually, sorry, I'm going to unselect import mesh. I do want to have it be a skeletal mesh. And I'm going to tell it what skeleton this animation applies to. And you can see, I could choose the mannequin one, but following this kind of like logic thread, I would do that. And by implication, if I'm not downloading the mesh, it seems to assume, yes, I'm downloading an animation. This is like a little bit of a hack or trick, like you probably don't need to worry about this. If you ever have a really long animation file, like longer than 10 seconds, I would change the custom sample rate to 60. I think that it'll just improve. It can take a long time to import these files, depending on how long they are. For our case, this is like a super quick one. Maybe someday in the future we'll look at all these other kind of things, but that's all we need to know. So I'll say import, again, a texture kind of thing. And you can see that I get a animation taunt Mixamo. So I mean, I can just rename this right now. I don't need the end of this stuff. And maybe I'll make a folder called animation. And it's occurring to me I might not have. And then sometimes it does this. It gives me a second one that's basically a T-pose. You can see it's already in a T-pose. If we opened it up in a second, it would be like that. I'm just going to delete that. I just hit delete. Did I not import my animations before? No, I didn't. So we can actually do that wholesale. This is a good chance to show you some other stuff. Just to back up, I'm going to move over. I just wanted to show you what all the download stuff is and what the different ways. This mannequin one I already did all the work for, and we're going to walk through with that character. But I downloaded a bunch of animations already. So I'm going to actually grab all of them, shift, and get rid of this taunt one. And I'm going to drag that here. And this is where we can say import mesh and turn that off. I'm going to choose the mannequin skeleton. Actually, just for sake of speed, I am going to change the custom sample rate to 60. And this is where I can say import all, and it'll just apply these settings to every animation I downloaded. You can see it walking through all of that. And again, some mistakes, not mistakes, but I want to get rid of these ones that are obviously T-pose. And I'll go back here. I'm sure this is fascinating watching me. I'm just doing F2. I'm just such a stickler for organization. All right. So, what do we have going on here? We've downloaded a bunch of things, and I've been kind of burying the lead a little bit. I've also renamed everything based on their things. The primary thing we downloaded with that character one, a skeletal mesh, is this one. And you can see as I hover over it says skeletal mesh. So I'm going to double click on it. Gives me a tab. That's great. And we can actually see in like kind of the corner up here, there's multiple different kind of new tabs I could select on. Right now with the mesh tab, what we can see is I can see a material slot. So this is where I can drop my materials that wrap it around the body. For instance, if I change that, something else wraps around it. I can see the skeletal mesh. If you don't see that, I think under character, bones, bone drawing, you might be seeing selected only. You could go to all hierarchy, but there you go. And I can like move around like kind of typical screen-based stuff. I usually do. The camera might move kind of fast. So that's a skeletal mesh. Going forward, there's also my skeleton. Multiple meshes can have the same skeleton, so that's why they're separate things right now. But for the most part, I'm working in a 1-to-1 ratio. This skeletal mesh has this skeleton. And if I could double click that, it shows me the drop-down hierarchy of this skeleton. And this is pretty important. We have the hips, the spine, and this is kind of like where all the motion capture data is applied to. We're basically recording each of these bones. That's what we're seeing here as its like location and rotation. And if I grab the neck, and you can see I have my usual like movement, rotate, scale. If I rotate the neck, everything below the neck rotates with it. So this is like what's called like kind of like a parent-child like hierarchy. I believe there's like a kinematics kind of hierarchy to it, which is a lot of how skeletal meshes work. And that makes sense, if I move my shoulder in real life, everything down the way of the shoulder moves with it. But if I move my elbow, I don't need my shoulder to move with my elbow. So there's kind of this like branching kind of like logic for all this. Again, seeing like left arm right here, you can see that I can rotate that and then move down to the forearm, and that is the elbow essentially. I do Command Z just to bring it back to everything. That's fantastic. If you wanted to see what it looks like again, you could go back to character, bones, all, and you get a sense of it. Yeah, and you could even move these if you wanted, but this is more just to show you stuff than it is to. I mean, this. Like you're not doing anything that would affect any kind of in-game stuff if you're moving this around. Then going over to the physics assets. Sorry, that was pretty quick. I've renamed it PA mannequin. This shows the ragdoll physics for the character if you choose to use it. Typically an animation and the physics assets like are totally different. You have to choose if you're using one or the other, because one is kind of replaying how this body moves and the other is kind of like allowing physics to control the body moves. If I come down here to simulate, you can see this is, if you've ever played a game where you see bodies falling around, this is what's known as ragdoll physics. If I hold Alt and right click, Control and right click, and select a bone, it lets me kind of like preview what it's like to grab a certain bone. And you can see what's happening here is each of these capsules is a collision capsule. And it applies to specific bones, and anything that's in that bone, it'll rotate independently of itself and create this kind of like hierarchy of like physics. You could get into this pretty deep. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but it's pretty fun to play with ragdoll physics, and I'm happy to share resources with you. But that's just know that's something it creates and makes for you. Again, the material here gave us these different textures, and if we look at the material, you can see, sorry about that. Let me grab these and bring them out. You can see it's like laid all these out, so the normal map goes here, the specular, the metallic, and the base color is the diffuse, and that's what gives it kind of this color kind of quality under light. I'm not going to, that's not the focus of this too much, so I'm going to move on. And then lastly, we have our animation files, and this is where it kind of starts to get fun. If I double click on animation idle, you can see it's showing kind of an idle movement kind of thing. There's a little timeline track if we want to scrub through and double check it. And going back, I can also look at this crying animation I downloaded. So I have to hit play. You can see how each of the bones are moving. Try this clap one. And that's, oh yeah, I do want to apply that. And that's kind of it. in terms of the basics of the files we have. You know, if I wanted to bring the skeletal mesh right on out, I would just drag them from here, rotate them a little bit. And right now we just kind of a T pose. There's nothing special. If I select them and bring up the details, I could go to animation. We're going to look at animation blueprints going forward, but I could also drop down to animation asset, animation to play, and any of my animations for this I could use. I could choose cry, and now when I hit play here, it would just play this on a loop. This is essentially just kind of a statue in the sense of like there's no coding or programming with it. We're not toggling. It's just going to play this on a loop as a skeletal mesh. So yeah, that's kind of the setup video. Here, moving on from here, we'll look at character blueprints, animation blueprints, how to kind of program some interactivity with this character based on the animations we downloaded. So name your assets, get it organized, or work off of this one, and I'll see you on the next video.